Right now, we are live, so I'm going to announce I have a special guest today, Stephen Paschal, who is I'm going to say a world-renowned artist, whose many gamers will recognize his military art because of companies like MMP, Academy Games, and even Grenier Games. Now, I do have a lot of Academy Games covers behind me. We'll talk about some of those later, but welcome, Stephen, and thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Now, I want to say right off the bat, everybody kind of knows, and I don't show any guests in here yet at this point in time, but this will be put up later. We have kind of been, we've never met personally, but I've been a fan of yours for years, and we've chatted or Skyped several times in the past.
Yeah, we have. That's right. Yeah.
Always have great conversations. Now, real quick, I've introduced you, but can you, give a rundown kind of got into, I know you've been an artist since, is it all the way back to the 60s?
Well, most of my life. But I didn't get serious about it until in my mid-30s. I fell into radio when I was about 25 years old, and I became a rock jock. I did most of that right here in Honolulu. And later on, I kind of was dissatisfied with radio, so I re-entered the artistic field, and I would paint in my spare time. But eventually, the art overtook everything else, and the radio simply wasn't as creative as I wanted it to be.
No.
So I became a painter full time, and my wife and my kids, we moved to Europe on a whim. Don't ask me why. I just, I wanted to channel Monet or something. I don't know, but we moved to Europe. We were living in southern Germany for almost about 9 years.
Wow.
And then I did a stint in Taipei and also in Hong Kong as a broadcast journalist working in radio. But always came back to Honolulu and been ever since full time. Heart and soul, I'm a tropical seascape painter.
Okay.
But I fell into doing cover art for war games because I discovered war games when I was fairly young, and like a lot of us did. I was playing the Avalon Hills, Battle of the Bulge, and D-Day and all that. And then SPI came along.
Sure.
And I just I went out of my mind over SPI games. One of the first things I got was Watch on Rhine, and that morphed into the Atlantic Wall, and then Highway to the Reich came out with the Arnhem operation. That was one of my favorite games. I think a lot of us felt that way.
Really?
But so, later on, excuse me, go ahead.
No, do you still game a lot currently, or is it?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I really don't. I kind of war game with my paintbrush. Mm-hmm. I kind of get a vicarious thrill just doing the cover art.
You do.
I would like to game, but I can't find guys my age who really have that much interest in it, particularly here in Honolulu. I say, hey, you want to war games? To hell, I'm going to the beach. What are you talking about? So
that's right.
It was one of those.
Yeah, we can sit inside, and they're like, no, go to the beach. Yeah. Now, if you were up in like Canada or Minneapolis.
Yeah, brr.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. By the way, for you guys in the Northeast, mea culpa.
Yeah. Even in the Midwest, in Kansas, I think it's 17 or 20 degrees right now.
I talked to Uli. I think he said it was like 7.
Yeah.
I said, well, better you than me. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was raised up in L.A., Los Angeles, and then I came to Hawaii in 1968. And the reason I had been bumming around Europe back in the mid-60s, bumming around, and I got back home to L.A. And right away I noticed the ad on television. Continental Airlines was featuring a one-way air ticket from LA to Honolulu, and I had never been here. So I looked at that, $85 they wanted. And I can cut that.
Wow.
So I flew into Honolulu.
One way.
Oh, listen. Yeah, and it was very little money, but listen, I got to tell you a brief story about that. I left Los Angeles on a July day in 1968. It was brutally hot. In those days, we had smog. It was, you were lucky if you could breathe. And on that particular day, I took a taxi to LAX to fly out, and you couldn't see a block ahead of you. The smog was so thick. I took off on Continental Airlines in 5 hours, or 4.5 it was. I landed in Honolulu on the kind of day that all tourists want. And I descended the airplane and walked across the tarmac. And I saw the breezes and the palm fronds blowing. And I thought, oh, I'm home.
You never left. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I
thought, oh, I'm home. Okay. And up on Honolulu in case anybody wants to ask. So
beautiful. Now, see, that was actually even on my list. I've got a little list here, and I knew from our prior chats that you'd lived or grew up as a child in LA, but I wondered how you ended up landing in Hawaii, and that's the perfect story. Especially, you're right, with all the smog and everything that was going on, you're not getting out with those lovely breezes.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it was brutal. It really was living in LA those days. You know, they've since done something about that. Yeah,
I'm checking on our chat room here, and let's see. So nothing's coming in yet, which is fine. Sometimes we'll get a lot of chat. Sometimes we won't. We've got 7 other people with us live, which is phenomenal. If anybody has any questions for Steve, go ahead and put them in, and when we get to certain points, I'll bring them up. One of the other things, I know we talked about Academy Games, so I'm going to tease it. We won't get into it yet, but you've talked to Uwe, who's the CEO president of Academy Games, and he's even giving you permission to talk about a few pieces of art that you're working on for future games. Is that right?
Yeah, I asked him about what he wanted me to maybe not talk about, because he may be waiting to promote something. But he said, "Hey, go for it." You know, so he's got a game coming out on basis, which he's very excited about. He says it's just really a cool game, and so he needed a cover for that. So I'm engaged in doing a painting on chariot races.
Yeah, I was wondering. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I didn't set out to be a cover artist at all. I mean, like I said, heart and soul, I'm a tropical seascape painter. So, but I kind of fell into it because I was a war gamer, and I went to that chat room on Consim World, and I saw this conversation about Multiman Publishing doing this game on the Arnhem operation called The Devil's Cauldron, and so I chimed in that if they needed a cover, because I was just really enthusiastic about this game.
Right.
And I said I'd be glad to consideration. So I did, and they used it, and that way I began both feet into doing cover art. And shortly after that, I was contacted by Uwe Eichers, and he asked me if I would consider doing it. I said sure. So, and that was about 8 years ago. I've been with them a long time.
Was that your first cover? Was that for the Conflict of Heroes, Awakening the Bear, which I have somewhere right here?
That was the first cover I did for Academy Games, yeah. Okay,
so that's the very first cover you did for Academy Games. And one thing that I always point out, even in my reviews, is your oil paintings. You do such a phenomenal job of depicting, to say motion is not quite right, but it always feels like the chaos of battle and how things are, things are just, it feels like things are moving, to that extent.
Well, movement is my bag. I mean, that's what I'm really interested in. And I can track that back to in 8th grade. I was going through a school library in my junior high school. And I happened to pull out a book. And I was interested in art, a book on art, on the French Impressionists. And I turned the page to a piece of art that was done by Claude Monet called the Boulevard du Capucines. And it was looking down on the boulevard with all the scurrying people and the carriages. Captured the movement of that painting. It blew me away. And I've been kind of addicted to that ever since. I must have done 3 or 4 copies of that painting just to try and figure out what he did. And so and I think that's what led me into doing seascapes, is because I really enjoy the movement of the sea and the waves and how it inhales and then breaches again. And to capture that is a real test. You know, some artists, you know, they kind of freeze frame
Right.
movement, or the wave breaking, and it kind of looks like it was cut out and pasted on the painting.
Right.
And so I knew enough that that's not where I wanted to go. You know, I wanted to portray people or in action. And when action takes place, and like you said the other day, it's kind of there's a blur factor. And if you get too focused on it, it freezes it. And one thing that's supposed to be portrayed as moving, it kind of loses its effect. It loses its effect almost in a dramatic way. So that's how all that began.
Beautiful. See, because that's what I've always wondered was right from the get-go, even the flames that are coming up off of the T-34 and the smoke and then everything that's going on back in the background. And my eye would just kind of get drawn, you know, it wasn't even like a sole focus. You know, I could feel the action here, but then what had happened and then the guys in front. And obviously, I mean, I can't speak for Uwe, but obviously he had felt some of the same thing, that it really, I mean, it's a spectacular cover.
Thank you.
And let me cover a few more. So instead of just a conflict of heroes, and I know this is the more recent, this is the his French and Indian War, 1754, but this is the Birth of America series. And I noticed like these feature a little different because I love how you've in the forefront, but then you've clearly got the opposing sides in battle on the side. And is there, you know, or how much direction does Uwe say, hey, I want a depiction of X, or does he just tell you this is the conflict and you do your own research? How does that work?
Yeah, we have a really visual relationship that's really fun. I mean, first of all, I mean, we like each other enormously. I mean, and that helps, you know, and so, and I'm not the kind of artist that Helen and my idea, it's my way or the highway. I enjoy feedback and I enjoy suggestions, and I'll make changes as long as it's appropriate, or as long as the painting itself will tolerate it without having to do a restart. And Uwe's very sensitive to that. So often, I'll give you an example. I was doing the 1775. Do you have that there?
I do. Let me, let's see. There's
a good story behind that.
Okay. I'll find it right now. I've got 1812 there. We're going to talk about freedom. I've got the Vikings. There it is. All right. Let me get it right. So 1775.
So we were talking about the cover for this game, 1775. One of his best games, by the way. I mean, people love this game.
I agree. I love it.
And I was really anxious to get into a Revolutionary War depiction or anything. So I thought, well, I gotta study up on this a little bit. So I did. And I began to work up an oil sketch. And Uwe and I talked about it, and I think he asked me to change one guy, and I changed a little bit. And then he said, oh, it looks really great. But, he says, you know what you ought to do? And I said, what? He said, why don't you put a couple of dogs in there? I said, dogs? To work on me a little bit. And I thought, yeah, dogs would look really cool. So I dropped a couple of dogs in that painting. So now, interestingly enough, when people see that painting, you know what they comment on mostly?
I'm going to guess. Yeah, I was going to guess the dogs.
The dogs. Yeah. And a couple of times on this, and that's the first thing they point out. Oh, yeah, I really like that 1775. Really love the dogs. And I thought, okay, yeah. So, I mean, and so you have to ask yourself, if without the dogs, I mean, would it fly? I mean, So his suggestions oftentimes are very, very good, very productive, and I welcome them. So yeah, he and I have a very good relationship.
Well, that is good. And once again, I mean, that's the nice thing of the feel. I get both the youthfulness of the rebels, the unconventionalness, even by their form of dress and their hat, and of course the red coats bearing down, coming out of the village or the little hamlet in the background, and that idea that they're sniping from the trees. And that's, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, obviously, you've painted the canvas, and then Uwe comes in and adds in his
The graphics.
styling. Right.
Yeah, he has a guy that does all the graphics. I forget the guy's name. Shame on me, because he's wonderful. And I think he's in Spain.
Is that?
But I'm not sure.
Could it be Jarek Nokan?
Yes, it's Jarek. That's right. Yeah, Jarek. Polish, I think.
Got it.
Polish. Anyway, he does wonderful graphics. And what I do, and this is, I'm lucky because I'm not a graphic artist. I don't know anything about graphics. I told Uwe, I said, listen, what I do is I paint a painting on canvas. I'm an oil on canvas guy. I ship the painting to you, and I try and provide a really high resolution photo so he can use that. But everything else he has to do himself. And that seems to work, because if he had me doing the graphics, it wouldn't look half as good. I can tell you that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He finds a graphic artist that obviously.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything on Freedom, which was a very interesting game that Academy Games puts out? Because I remember when this came out, the whole idea is that it's the Underground Railroad and you're working cooperatively to free the slaves. And there was a lot of, I was at a convention where it was, I want to say, almost white guilt with folks even playing it. And I kept telling them, I said, you're working cooperatively to free the slaves, and that this is a real thing. I mean, there's an educational basis here. Was there any, did you have any, how did you even tackle the subject from the artist standpoint?
Well, with great difficulty, and you can talk to Uwe about that. We had a lot of talks about this. I think I did about 4 different starts on this, 4 different ways to look at it. And the first 3 or 4, what I was doing was I showed some white
abolitionists
helping the blacks across this and doing that, and it just didn't feel right. And I began to realize that the subject is about freeing the African Americans, and so they should dominate the cover. And then I began to read up and study some history on it, and I found out about these heroines who actually led the way, and so I decided to feature the black people on the cover. And I have to tell you, I really thought the game was chancy. I thought, I hope this doesn't ignite bad feelings. But it was done by the guys who designed the game. It was done in a way that had a lot of simpatico. Otherwise, the whole thrust and theme of the game was to realize that what we did was and should have been done a lot earlier. And so far, the game has been, if I remember right, Uwe said it's quite successful. It's working out pretty good.
Yeah, he's got a companion, like a companion history book that comes out with it. I know it's used as a teaching tool, I think both in schools and in a lot of homeschooling areas. But I mean, it's definitely, and it's a very tough game. I've got it upside down on the back. It's a very tough game in its own right, but a lot of difficult decisions along the way that you can't. I mean, that's one of the, I think where the game does get heavy is you can't save all the slaves even as you're trying to free them, and you have to struggle with that and all the correct history as you deal with the cards and everything that comes in. But I'd wondered on that because you've depicted, this is one of the first times I think where you depicted it's a nighttime scene as well.
That's how I saw it. It's a clandestine operation, and there's nothing better depicted than nighttime for clandestine operations. So that was my thrust. Plus, I got to tell you something. I'm very sensitive to the whole race issue. I wasn't particularly raised as in a racial situation in LA. I mean, I'm married out of my race. My wife is a Japanese American. A lot of my friends are married out of the race here in Honolulu. And I got to tell you something, here in Hawaii, the vast majority of people simply don't give a rip what color you are. I mean, there's so much interracial marriage here where a lot of people have 5, 6, 7, 10 different races. My own children, I have like about 5 different cultures on them,
Right.
And so going back and reading the history where we selected one race to be suppressed, to be enslaved, simply, I thought, we got to do something that breaks the bonds here, and that was the thrust of my doing that painting. I wanted to make sure that they were shown being liberated, and they were liberating themselves. It wasn't white people liberating them. It was them saying, "Okay, I've got the guts and I've got the gumption, and I'm going to make the brick."
Sure, and you've got
and that's what they did.
Right, and you got the whole family unit portrayed there as well.
Right. Yeah.
Now, one thing that Uwe does, which is also amazing, is he moves into some war game areas that aren't typical, which is what I love about Academy Games. And this is the 1939 Poland, where Russia is coming in from one side and Germany is coming up from the other. And you've got this beautiful, now, did you settle, you've got aircraft coming in. Did you settle on one piece of art here? A lot of people know about the famous, the cavalry units from the Polish units that were mounted on horseback. Was there one choice for you, or how did you come upon this scene?
Well, I had read about that. And because, he said, we're going to do the Polish and the Russians. And so I'm as much as of a history enthusiast as I am. I hadn't studied much about that, so I read a little bit about that, and I found out about that one cavalry charge. And I was reminded later by some Polish Americans who are really up on this, that it was maybe a little bit too emphasis that these people made cavalry charges against tanks and so forth.
Right.
And I thought, well, so what? What it does is it vindicates the Poles, and it demonstrates their valor, which they showed on those days without question. So why not?
Right.
So that's what I wanted. That's what I sought to portray. And they were up against great odds. They were up against the Luftwaffe. They're up against infantry, and I thought, what better way to show it?
Yeah, and the Allies hadn't allowed them to mass troops because they were saying that'll actually goad Hitler into invading, and so then they were caught flat-footed when the actual invasion occurs. So I love that, and I'm going to bring up a few more. I know for a fact that when Guadalcanal came out, you had 2 different paintings, full paintings for this, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I think the second painting is reflected on the back, at least in part. Right?
Oh yeah, with the Stuart tank. Is that what part of this is here?
That's part of that. Yeah. And the second painting was called "Clearing the Coconut Grove." After the battle of the Alligator Creek, they crossed the creek into the Coconut Grove where the Japanese had amassed, and they moved in with some Stuart tanks, and it was a real meat grinder. And so this particular cover, I sought to demonstrate was the iconic Japanese bonsai attack. The second painting, Clearing the Coconut Grove, I wanted to demonstrate the Americans' reaction to that. And he couldn't use both, but I told him that, if he could do it. So he did. So he showed a little bit of that in the back.
Perfect. Now this kind of segues in, because I know from having talked to you, your father-in-law, your wife's father, actually is Japanese American descent, and he fought with the 442nd.
Yeah, well, a lot of people know about this now, but and I have to tell you something, honestly. Being raised in Los Angeles, where much of this took place when the censorship of the Japanese and carting them off to the, for all intents and purposes, were concentration camps, over about 110,000 of them. I grew up not knowing anything about that. And the funny thing about that is a good friend of mine that I went to school with, Gabonese, and he Japanese American, and we grew up together. And I later found out that his parents had come from those detention camps, but he had never mentioned, I'm not even sure he knew anything about it because I never talked to him about it. I didn't find out about it until after I moved to Honolulu and picked up the newspaper here one day when I first got here. And there was an article on it because so many of these Americans that became members of the political structure here had fought for the 442nd. So I found out about it that way. And then after I married my wife, Pat, I found out her dad had fought with the 442nd. And the second generation Japanese, he was born here in Hawaii, and they were considered American, except after the Pearl Harbor attack, America looked at them as potential enemies. So these guys, they eventually talked the American government into letting them form a special unit, and the rest is history. They went on to demonstrate their American loyalty, and boy, did they. The most decorated unit in the history of the U.S. Army for its size and length of service. They are more famous for a part of a battalion of the 36th Division that was trapped in the Vosges Mountains, right on the border of Germany and France. And it was September, October. It was drizzly, rainy, ice cold, and these about 260 or 270 guys were surrounded by German units, some of them elite units, mountain divisions. And the 442nd, which was attached to the 36th Infantry Division, led by a General Dahlquist, who history has not been kind to. I mean, he used to use these guys as cannon fodder.
Right.
They had just taken the town of Bruyere, which is at the foot of the Vosges. And they were really depleted and really suffering and beaten up. And he put them still to save this battalion, about a 5-mile fight, uphill, all uphill. One of the first bonsai charges of World War II from the American side. And anyway, they liberated these guys, and they took from Bruyere, as well as the liberation of the Lost Battalion, as it was called. They took 830 casualties.
Yeah.
With about 180 dead. So even the guys who were rescued looked back on that and said, my God, the casualties they took to just save, 240 guys who survived it. So they really made a name for themselves back in the go for broke, which was the motto of the 442nd. Anyway, I enjoyed conversations with him. Typical of World War II veterans, he didn't have much to say about it. I said, well, tell me something about your World War II experiences. He says, okay, they were shooting and I was ducking. The only other thing I get from him, I said, come on, give me some details. He says, okay, we were hiking over a hill and there was a German unit eating breakfast. I said, what'd you do? He said, we opened up and cut loose. I said, you just killed them? He says, yeah, them or us. And that's the sum of my war stories from my wife's dad.
That's all he'd give you.
Them or us.
That's it. That's perfect. Now, I want to note, usually I'm getting some comments coming in, but I think my comment screen may not be working correctly. So I apologize to anybody if you're trying to comment. It doesn't look like I'm able to pick them up at this point in time. I've tried a couple different things. And I will say it's probably my user error. If I get it figured out, I'll take your questions, guys, but I can't seem to see any that are coming in. So we're going to drive on. Now, we'll come back to some of these other covers that we have here. But before I do, I wanted to talk about, and I know you can't go into, you don't know Academy Games release schedule, but I know you've worked on the Normandy Airborne, I think it was called A Few Good Men, or I can't remember, but it was also a night parachute drop that you got a cover for.
Yeah, that game is yet to be released, but that's not unusual. I mean, I sometimes do covers that are, not actually applied for publication until, a year or two later. And that's because Uwe Eichert, Academy Games, is so concerned about that he refuses to let a game go out until he's emptied himself of the last vestige of creativity, And
Right.
of course, the result is these fabulous games that Academy is very famous for. But I did a couple of the airborne guys. I did this cover twice. The first cover I did for that was kind of a broad panorama of the night drop, and he suggested we do something a little bit more in your face. Okay. So I got a couple of paratroopers, popping up over a hedge, getting ready to take on the bad guys, and with a bunch of paratroopers dropping from the sky. It's a nighttime scene.
Now you also sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just said I don't have it with me right now to show you, but
right, I know that
we'll get it sooner or later.
Yep, he's teased that one, and that's where I've seen it. I think it's on a couple of his, like future releases. You also did a great one that I believe is in 1940 with France and the German invasion coming across. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, it's the battle. I think it's French 1940. I think that's what it's going to be called. Don't quote me.
Sure.
But yeah, it's some German soldiers depicted running across a plowed field towards one of those French tanks, and that's being worked on right now. By the way, Pavlos Garmidis in Greece, he's the designer of that particular. That's a Conflict of Heroes game, I think.
Yes, it is.
And I know Google wants to get that out as soon as it can.
Beautiful.
That's it. That's in the tank, ready to go. I think just about.
Beautiful. Now, have you done any other covers that maybe haven't been released? I know you've got the Chariot one that you're working on, and if folks want to see that, they can go to your.
Well,
Facebook.
Do something. Yeah, he wanted to do something on the Arnhem operation. So, and I don't remember how this came up, but he and I were talking, and we decided that what we wanted to do was something a little different. So we did the depiction of the 82nd Airborne crossing of the Wall Canal under fire, and with boats being blown up and airplanes flying over it. So there's that one. And that's in the lineup too. And we also did the Vikings, which I see you had behind you. That's been published. That was a very very popular game. I think also that came out during that right after that series of the Vikings was released.
Yeah.
And I know people are really into this Vikings thing. This is a very popular game.
Yeah.
It's a great game. So it's.
Now, I know there's this is the Birth of Europe series. Obviously, I don't know if it'll be a trilogy like the Birth of America. Are there any sneaks? Have you been asked to do any other kind of European eras that you think are attached to this?
Yeah, I don't recall offhand. We're talking about it. I know there's we're talking about it. I just don't remember all they are.
Sure.
I have so much going on. Oftentimes I can't remember what we talked about, the day before. So.
Oh, I'm with you.
But I had fun. But the other artists he had working doing the depictions on the cards and the game map and all that were wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I mean, you hit it on the head. Uwe's very exacting. When he comes in, right down to the trays that are in here and how you can pull them out and I mean, he just I really appreciate. I've had people say I'm kind of a Academy Games fanboy, but I agree with you that the quality that comes out. I never get the feeling he's rushing anything. If anything, he and I have talked where he'll get people so excited, and then there's delay after delay after delay that I think our current culture. A lot of people, they get so excited they kind of burn out. I always tell folks, I back a lot of stuff on Kickstarter or whatever, and my whole feeling is it arrives when it arrives. I unfortunately have too many more games than I could play if that's all I did. So, but
well, I know Uwe doesn't. I don't think he stresses too much over that. I mean, I think he realizes, like a lot of us do, that people are not necessarily panting, waiting with bated breath for a war game. They momentarily want to spout and say, well, when the heck is this thing coming out? But he knows that the quality is an attribute of these games that are never overlooked. And I've seen a lot of your reviews that you post on YouTube, and I really enjoy your reviews. You do very good reviews. You're good at it. I mean, you should quit your day job and do this.
No, at some point I will retire. I'm lucky in law enforcement. I'm doing the career I dreamt of since I was 5. So I've always said I'm getting to do what I've always dreamt of, and now I get to just dabble in these. I dabble in whiskey reviews with the Scotch Test Dummies, and with bonding with board games, I get to dabble with my board game love.
To bust people for real.
That's right.
Anyway, he's such a quality guy, which that really bonded me to Academy, not just through Uwe, but his son Gunter and his wife Kari, who helps on. They're not just great to work with. They're great people. They're good people, and I know that's partly responsible for the great quality of product they put out, because they're all of the same mind. If we're going to put something out, let's put out the best we know how to do. And that's what you get with Academy Games. Now, I'm sure the other game companies are working in the same line. I'm sure they are.
Sure.
But I can't speak to them. I can only speak to Academy because I got to know them real well. And when you buy Academy game, you are getting a great game, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Right.
And you don't have to stress over that.
Yeah. Now, early on, I know he did a block game, his Fog of War series, and this is a very chaotic scene that you depicted here. How much work, when I look at this, there just seems there's so much detail that you've worked into here. How was this a more difficult painting, or do you recall? I mean, maybe I'm going too deep into it, but I mean, this one, there's the compacted action that's going on.
Well, honestly, what I did is I think I started off just showing I wanted to show opposing forces, and I got a couple of people in there and a couple of horses in there, and I thought, wait a minute, this is way too sedate. I do remember that. I think there's just not enough. And so I put a couple of more in there, and I thought, well, now it's starting to pick up. And I put a couple of more in there, and I said, okay, now we got a war. And I put a couple of more in there. I said, boy, now we got a hell of a war.
Yeah.
And at that point, I realized I had it covered. and that's the honest to God's truth. I just kept adding stuff into it, kind of ad hoc, And
perfect. Yeah, because you've got is this like a Cossack here that's coming in with a saber charge?
Yeah.
And you've got the troop, more of a modern kind of troop that's getting around. I mean, the whole thing is what I really liked. And this is one of Uwe's more obscure games, I think, too.
Whoever heard of this? Whoever heard of the Polish and the Russian? I didn't know anything about it.
Yep.
And, but Uwe likes to do that. He likes to say, let's scare everybody a little bit here. Let's put something out that they never heard of,
Yeah, the year 1920. Yeah, I mean, World War I's over. World War II hasn't started yet. I mean, and you get to see what Poland was just in the center of like you said, a meat grinder for years and years and years.
And the main thing with that cover is I wanted to depict not just opposing forces, but opposing forces at head on at a full gallop.
Right.
Really running into one another. And I think we got it.
You did. And I think when people, you can just see that, you can see where it's right at the tip of the spear where they've clashed into each other. And that's where the smoke and you can feel the speed of the Cossack and the desperation of the troop that's on the ground. And this is what, I mean when I say that the way you depict the speed of combat has always really deeply intrigued me, and I'm so glad you explained how you came across that. Now, on this note, you mentioned I found just doing some research on you're mostly self-taught as far as your artist.
Yeah, I'm completely self-taught, but that's a bit deceptive. I want to speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
in today's society, the arts are so we can go to museums and we can study great paintings and we can make copies of them, find out how they did that, how it works. And back in the 60s, when I was bumming around Europe for the first time, I spent a lot of time going in, great museums like the Louvre. And I'd sit, look at these paintings and think, oh, this is wonderful. And later on, I look at them in picture books and try and study how it works. So it's not, even though you're self-taught, it's not as if any kind of instruction. And then I got heavily into plein air painting. I mean, I did a lot of painting outdoors. Where I paint the sea and the trees and the mountains. And as somebody once said, that's probably one of the best instructors you're going to have, because you have what you want to paint sitting right in front of you. It's in full color. It's in the proper lighting. It has everything you're looking at. All you have to do is find a way to depict it. So self-taught doesn't mean what it used to mean. It means that you took the time to explore. You took the time to read. You took the time to go on YouTube and look at some of the videos. They have art videos on YouTube with some very good artists demonstrating how to paint a vase or how to paint a flower. So self-taught it's a bit duplistic. It doesn't mean you're ignorant. It doesn't mean you haven't learned to paint.
Sure. I'm just telling you, you're looking at a guy, like they put me in a Pictionary game once and they couldn't tell if I drew a dog or a horse. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people tell me that.
Oh,
you either are or you're not. I think, art is, it's like, musicians and writers and painters. You either have to want to do it to the exclusion of everything else or you don't. And if you do, then you do. And if you don't, you do something else. So
I'm with you.
I happen to paint pictures. That's all. Yeah.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, let's see. I think we've hit on my topics. Anything we've talked a little bit. Let's see. We got the radio DJ. Even before I met you, I talked to Uwe. Uwe and I had met at a few conventions, and I always say it wrong, but he had mentioned that is it your religion? How do I'm going to mispronounce it, so I'll let you pronounce it again. How do you say it?
The Baha'i faith.
Baha'i faith.
B-A-H-A apostrophe I. B-A-H-A apostrophe I. Baha'i. Baha'i, we regard all the major world religions as successive steps in man's spiritual progression. And we believe this occurred again with the emergence of a personage called, which means the glory of God. Baha'i faith began in 1844. Baha'i means follower of Baha'u'llah. That's what it means. As Christian means follower of Christ.
Got it. Yeah, because it came out of Iran, correct?
In Iran, Persia at the time. And it started in Shiraz, where a young man called the Bab announced that he was the forerunner of the great Messiah anticipated by all the major world religions. And his religion it created an incredible story. The history of the Baha'i faith is extremely interesting just from the historical standpoint. I mean, you don't have to want to be interested in religion. Just to read up on the history of it is fascinating. And it fills a lot of gaps in history that we don't have.
Yeah. Yeah, just when I was researching some before we came on, I said there's still many of the Baha'i faith in Iran. There's some persecution of them.
Very much.
Yeah, that's what it's kind of one of the things that it mentioned, and that also talked about how it had spread and grown. But that I think it mentioned most of the followers, maybe not most, but it mentioned there's still thousands and thousands in Iran.
There is. Although years ago, they were encouraged by the Universal House of Justice, and the center of the Baha'i faith is in Haifa, Israel, on Mount Carmel. And they were going to get out years ago because they knew that the persecutions were going to get fairly radical, particularly under Ayatollah Khomeini back 40-some years ago, back when he took over, 78, 77?
Right, when they deposed the Shah. Yeah.
So there's about 6 or 7 million, we're not sure how many, but there's a goodly amount in India and Persia and in Southeast Asia, here in America. And, I mean, it's the second most widespread religion in the world. You didn't expect to hear that, did you?
No,
in other words, there's Baha'is in more different places than there is in, I think the most widespread is Christianity. So. But we validate all those world religions, including Islam. You know?
Sure.
So,
yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and I know you will talk about it on Facebook every once in a while, and I'm sure if anybody has questions, they can even reach out to you on Facebook.
anytime, sure, anytime.
Yeah.
I'm a fairly active Baha'i, but I don't I don't invade my art too much. What I do is I do depict certain scenes from Baha'i history. And like you mentioned, the latest one was that caravanserai, a large, that was a 14-foot painting.
Yeah,
It's
that's
the
beautiful.
largest I've ever done. Yeah, it's a caravanserai, which is a Middle Eastern hotel, basically. And it's centered in the prison fortress of Akka, which under the Ottoman Empire, it was a penal colony. It was the Alcatraz of the Ottoman Empire, where Baha'u'llah was sent, by the way. And so that's why I painted that particular caravanserai, because it housed many of the pilgrims that went to go visit Baha'u'llah. Getting back to war games.
Sure.
I wanted to mention that Multiman Publishing let me do 3, which I mentioned: Devil's Cauldron and Where Eagles Dare, which is the Arnhem operation. Devil's Cauldron is depicting the first British Airborne's attack on Arnhem itself, and Where Eagles Dare features the American 82nd and 101st Airborne up the entire highway, or maintaining the highway, the integrity of it. Both are fabulous games. And then I did a thing called Kawaguchi's Gamble, which was Kawaguchi's trying to take a bloody ridge, and that was a nighttime depiction as well. And you can find that on Multiman's website.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Now, what other projects, as we're getting down to our last 10, 15 minutes, what else do you have going on? Is there any, where can people find you? I do know that you have prints even available. I think, where do people go if they wanted to look at your work or even buy prints?
It's a website, and it's StephenPaschal.com. STEPHEN, Paschal. Just www.stephenpaschal.com, and they're welcome to go there. If they want to contact me, my contact number and everything's there. Or they can go to Facebook and they can contact me and we'll have a chat with them.
Beautiful.
And I'm busy most of the time. I'm either doing stuff for UBA at Academy Games, or I'm doing Hawaiiana, tropical seascapes, that kind of thing. I think it's one of the things that I urge people from doing who are interested in art is to select one thing and stay with it. I think you can do that later after you've learned to paint everything else, but not early on. And of course, a lot of guys do that out of expediency. Sometimes they find something that works and they have to keep hammering at it because it pays the bills.
Right.
But I think it's really important that you paint comfortable with. And this is what war games and war gaming did for me. It made me a better artist because it forced me to depict things I didn't know anything about and had never depicted before. Paint and on canvas. And so I have to thank the war game industry for that, and Uwe in particular, because of his unusual production scheme. Take these very obscure battles that took place and say, okay, Steve, I want a bunch of Poles on horseback taking on tanks, and now, oh great, people in hell want ice. But
Now, you may not be able to move. I know you're on your tablet, but are you able to? Is the chariot piece that you're working on with your easel, is that anywhere close where the folks could see it, or would you prefer not to even go into that area?
You were kind of breaking up. Can you say that again?
Are you able with your tablet to even show maybe your workspace or where the current chariot?
Yeah, sure.
That you're working on?
Yeah, sure. I think I can do that.
I know we may lose some light or whatever, but I loved, you just recently put a shot out on Facebook where you could see, I think you said you were 90% done or 80?
About 60%.
Okay.
Okay, I thought I changed, but I didn't. Okay. Oh, okay. Is that?
There we go. Yep.
I can't see it.
Well, that's right. It switched back to you now.
Okay, switch back. Hang on.
That's all right. I'm sorry. I'm bringing up the level of difficulty on the production. There we go. I'll quit talking so then they can see.
Yeah, this is what I'm working on now. It's for that game that Uva's putting out about the chariot races, which he says is just a fabulous game. I'm only about 60% done. There's going to be a little more chaos involved, but major work, not just a cover. And I'm having a lot of fun doing it, you know. So this is my workspace. I have a fairly nice workspace here in Hawaii. So this is all screened in. And yeah, sometimes when the rain gets a little bit too breezy, I have to kind of shut down operations for a couple hours or a day. But other than that,
well, that's cool. So that's more of a patio. I didn't know that. So that's just a screened in. So
yeah, it's a lanai. Yeah, it's a lanai that I turned into a studio. It's really kind of perfect. Fairly nice work area.
Beautiful. Yes.
But anyway,
I did not know that. That is wonderful.
And it's well lit, and so I don't have to rig lights or anything. I don't have to work at night. I do have some, bad guy detection lights, but when I turn them on, they do shine on the camera. So if I have to work at night, I can.
Okay.
It's simple. And Leonardo da Vinci said something once, which I've always heeded. He said artists should never have a large studio because when you have a large studio, you find to do besides paint. And there's a lot of truth to that. There really is. Because at one time when we were living in southern Germany, I had a huge room. And I painted less because I was always screwing around with something else. Right? Anyway.
No, that's great. Thanks for letting us take a peek behind there. I love that.
Good.
Because now when I picture this or whatever else, now I know at some point in time the canvas of this was seating on that easel in your workspace, in your studio, right there out in the beautiful Hawaiian breeze blowing in.
I named the easel, by the way. The easel's her name is Big Hilda.
Now you traveled through Germany, so did you get this from a large woman at a shop, or how did that happen?
No, but I tell you why. I mean, it was kind of a mnemonic device. I realized if I made a person out of it, it would hound me. So I mean, I'm a lazy artist like everybody else. I mean, I'll sit on my butt and drink coffee just as long as they let me, So, but if I got an easel out there and I think, but I got a painting and have it out there, I work on it, And so naming the easel Big Hilda, I feature somebody who's a real taskmaster, get your butt out there and get away. That helps me get out there.
I hear the German accent, and the say it would be more like come paint.
Yeah, right.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Kommen Sie hier. Malen.
Here. Snell.
Yeah. Well, I see we're kind of running out of time, Bart. Do we have to stretch this all the way to 5 more minutes or what?
We don't. I think Schnell and Kommen Sie here is almost a perfect ending, actually. I think.
Well, you know what they say: anything produced benefits by cutting it shorter.
That's it. I think it's perfect. Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I just love hanging out with you. And I know we do this on occasion, or I definitely want to do it more when we're not live and we can just hang out and keep up the great work. I love your covers, and I'll push on Uva to make you do about 10 more. I want to see more and more.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed myself. And good luck to you. Okay.
Thank you. Hey, thanks to everybody that tuned in. Sorry I couldn't get the chat working. That's all on me. And I missed your questions, so I apologize to everybody out there. Thanks again, Steve. And I'm going to sign off. Steve, go ahead and stay on just for a little bit as I break our connection here.
Okay.
And